before we go into the movie, have an opportunity to hear about what each of our speakers are doing day to day, how the movie came to life. So what I'd like to do is maybe just start off, Ian, will just tell us what we should expect this evening. We'll take it from there.
I don't know, I'm so depressed at the moment, because we did a screening earlier, and there was some young person about knee-high to us, baby spirit bear, that said, "I don't get it, this film's 41 minutes long and you've been doing this for how many years?" Yeah, the attrition rate on projects like this is rather high. I just don't like to be reminded of everything that's left on the cutting room floor, but sorry, what was the question?
See, the Great Bear Rainforest really is incredible. It's visually stunning, it's wonderfully respectful, and really very full of hope for the future. You know, what was it like trying to capture this unique habitat on film?
Well, it's very challenging, as Janie knows, who lives there as well. It's a very large coastline. It's half the Pacific is 15,000 miles of coastline. There's over 1,000 intact, uninhabited islands. It's home to over 20 different First Nation territories. It's a remarkable thing that this place still exists on the planet today in such an intact fashion, but also that it's in North America's backyard. So to try to put it into a 40-plus minute film is deeply challenging as a filmmaker. It's one of the most productive oceans in the world that meets an incredible intact rainforest. And the species diversity between the ocean and the rainforest together are some of the most dynamic and complex and diverse on planet Earth. And of course, a story like this, in a place like this, couldn't be told other than through the voice of First Nations people that have over 14,000 years of history. And so to try to combine all of that into, again, this shorter format was a huge challenge. But I think that, you know, we scratched the surface on this place, we introduce it, and it's certainly my hope, and I know everyone that worked on this film's hope that this will serve as a catalyst for conversations about the future of this area and the need to protect it.
Janie, you mentioned at dinner, and this wasn't on the list of questions I shared, but I'm going to go way off track. You mentioned at dinner last night just the process, just so that people can understand just how remote you are. Would you explain the process of getting groceries?
Okay. Yes, we are extremely remote and we're land-based. And there's no roads, there's no electricity. We truly are the only facility on the island. We have 3 stations set up now. And in order to get food to the station, because we're feeding a large number of interns that are very hungry, they're very young, they need to eat a lot. What we do is we send an email to a community that's about 4 hours by boat for us away. We send in that email, they actually do the shopping for us. They'll deliver it to a ferry that goes to a First Nations community named Hartley Bay, which is about an hour commute for us by boat. So we'll meet the ferry in Hartley Bay to pick up our groceries and then we take them back. So it actually costs us more to get the food there than it does for the actual food. Yeah.
Thank you, sorry. But you know, with regards to your research, you said that you were about 9 years old, I think, when you first heard a recording of whale song and humpbacks and orcas. How did that make you feel? What was it about that really just started this incredible career?
Yes, I really was 9 years old, and I heard the recording of a humpback whale. And for me, it was my first emotional response to the sound. So of course, I'd already heard music. I was quite interested in sound at a young age. But it's when I heard that humpback song that it just hit something in me, and I knew that I would be working with whales or protecting whales or doing something with whales for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Michael, thank you again to the Save Our Seas Foundation for launching our Distinguished Speaker Series and allowing us to bring Great Bear Rainforest to the museum. Now, you have a huge passion about ocean conservation and sharks. How did someone born in Switzerland, which is about as far from the ocean in Europe, fall in love with sharks and the ocean?
Well, I think everybody knows the reputation of Switzerland, so I always say we have the most sharks. None of them need protection. I guess the grass is always greener in your neighbor's yard. My parents probably wished I was studying mountain goats. It would have been much closer to them. But my passion for sharks, my parents gave me my first book on sharks, and there were no CDs with shark songs. For me, they're just the most perfectly adapted creatures in the marine world. Sorry to say, I know we don't agree with the orcas, but and that's where the passion started. Obviously, I grew up in a period when there was no Discovery Channel, no IMAX documentaries, so the only documentaries we got were the Cousteau series in those days, and yeah, that Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, I was in front of that TV watching the only underwater film that was existing in those days, really. So,
thank you. Ian, you are an award-winning photographer, and I do hope after the movie this evening, as you leave, we have an incredible photography exhibit that you'll see as you leave the IMAX theatre. So you're a photographer, an author, director of Great Bear Rainforest. Do you transition from being a visual artist to a writer, or do you combine everything together? What works best for you?
Yeah, it's a dog's breakfast for sure. I don't know. It's often, I find, challenging. The best case scenario is you're not thinking of the place you're in and the work you're doing through any kind of filter or lens. You're just trying to be there and understand it, because there's so many different elements to the coast that we live in. But on occasion you get embroiled in these projects where you have to start thinking through certain lenses, and it's actually, from still photography to television productions, now more recently to this IMAX film, you actually start looking through different lenses and different framing, different frame rates, different everything. It's a very sad way to be looking at the natural world, but as a filmmaker, you often have to do that. And so, for example, this IMAX screen that you'll see tonight, it's square, and your subject has to be in that lower third, and there's just so many different things than other mediums and formats. But I often find myself, when working on a specific project, whether it's a book or whatever, that you're kind of looking at it through that lens. Pretty hard to switch from one to the other. You really need to immerse yourself into that format.
Thank you. Janie, I'm going to ask a little about your work specifically. So what Janie does is puts underwater hydrophones out all around the island to listen to whales, and it sounds like it's a 24/7 listening experience. As you listen to whales, does it feel like you're learning a new language? And do you think we'll ever be able to truly understand the language of whales?
Yeah, that is a really important question. Definitely, when we're listening to whales, it really does complete the picture. So when if you happen to be on the water and have the privilege of seeing a whale, you're seeing them and they're coming up, they're taking a breath, but everything is really happening under the water. And so when you get to listen to whales, you're suddenly putting two parts of a picture together, and it really is the underwater part that's really telling you everything. And all whales do have different languages. Every whale species has their own way of communicating, because sound is really how they perceive their environment. It's how they, how we sit here now and we're looking at each other. For them, it's all about sound. It's what they hear. That's what gives them the message as to what's in their environment. So when you're listening to that, it's very powerful. In regards to understanding what that language is, one of the most important things that was ever said to me was when I first started off as an intern many years ago, and I went into my first research station where they also had hydrophones in the water. And what was said to me by a fellow by the name of Dr. Paul Spong, he said, "Close your eyes, because that's the life of a whale." So we would close our eyes and we would listen. And that is when you actually begin to understand that language to them is very different than language to us. So in regards to understanding what that language is, I think that with technology we're getting closer and closer, but we've got a long ways to go because they're whales and they think very different. They've evolved in a marine environment, and I think it's something that we have to think differently than the way we speak. The way they're speaking, it's completely different. So we've got a long ways to go.
Thank you. Michael, the Save Our Seas Foundation over the past decade has funded over 150 different research projects literally all around the world. Would you maybe talk a little about the foundation and share some of the highlights?
It's actually a bit old data, but we've celebrated our 15th anniversary this year, so it's our founder is also our sole benefactor, and he has a passion for sharks and the oceans, and he's dived obviously in most amazing places, and in his 30, 40 years of diving, he's been to the most secluded and amazing places, and he's seen how the environment was deteriorating, how the population of sharks and fish were basically on the decline, and that's kind of what prompted him to start the foundation. So the foundation, this is our only non-shark ray project that we actually funding. We have a couple of turtle projects, but really we fund exclusively shark and ray research and conservation and education projects. So it's but I think what the foundation has always done is fund passionate people, and certainly up in my few visits up to the Great Barrier Rainforest, both spending some time with Ian and with Janie, they are some of the most passionate people I've met, dedicating their lives to those whales and living. When she says it's an hour with her boat, that's if she was closing her eyes. It usually takes 3-4 hours to get to the research station, because every 100 yards there is an orca or a whale, and so no, it's so we fund projects around the world, and we really thrive through the people we fund, who are those incredible researchers. Those incredible researchers and conservationists who obviously bring the knowledge that is so important to be able to conserve a species, warn a habitat, and change the world. So that's what we try to do. And I think you were mentioning the magazine is kind of our way to be able to communicate those incredible stories to a wider audience. So yeah.
Thank you. And of course, the movie itself is just an incredible way to really get the message out about the work that's happening behind the scenes as well. So Ian, as the CEO of Pacific Wild, I think one of the things that comes across in the movie is just that message of hope. And you'll see the characters who are in there, and a lot of these are young children who are just ready and able to really take on the future, I think. Would you tell us a little about the work of Pacific Wild, behind the scenes of the movie that allows us to have this hope for the future?
It's it's bittersweet, because we're on one hand there is a sense of hope. I mean, this is an incredible place. It's the largest, most intact temperate rainforest left on planet Earth, one of the rarest forest types. It supports this incredible population of recovering humpback whales, and the ocean and marine life is extraordinary. And It's being stewarded by First Nations, Indigenous people in their same traditional territories since the Ice Age. And you know, Canada's got a relatively small population.